to Lectora Live. So we are currently in our pre-show. We're just going through shots right now. We've got Peter Sorenson with us, and we'll start the show shortly. So let me just make sure. How does your lower third look here? Can you read that okay?
Yeah.
It's cut off, but it's not really cut off. It's only the TV you're looking at. Everything spelled okay?
Yeah. And I provided it, so it's surprising that it is correct. So self-deprecating humor is always a winner. So
that's right. You're part of the Lectora Advisory Board, right?
Yes, yeah, okay. And it's always a question as to whether that was a unanimous decision or not.
Drafted?
Yeah. Well, I can tend to be a bit, I won't say abrasive, but I'll say a bit more challenging, perhaps, than some of the other
that's actually good.
Colleagues.
No, that's actually a good thing. See, I think if you're on an advisory board and you're not somewhat abrasive or trying to make change happen, then everybody's just going, yep, love it, and nothing gets done. So
yeah.
Well, we should talk about
I come at the issues a little differently, I guess. I mean, having been exposed to a number of different development tools, and not just web-based, but CD-based as well.
Right.
You get a little jaded by some of the capabilities of some of the other tools, and you wonder why they can't be part of the same tool that you happen to be using at that point in time. So.
Yep. Oh, that's true. Well, we can talk about that on the show. That'll be fun. Yeah.
Sure.
We've been doing e-learning about 20 years. And 21 years technically, officially into e-learning. I've been involved with e-learning since the 70s, on very late 70s, on green screen, back in the old IBM green screens. And there was no interactivity. There was interactivity, but there was no media. It was, in fact, the first thing I ever did was on a teletype terminal. And if you remember those, but that was 1972, my first programming class. There were no monitors. We had teletype terminals, and we would type to interact with the computer. It was fun.
Yeah, I remember actually taking some of the first classes. I got into programming kind of late, actually. But I remember taking a class in high school. This will date me a little bit, but when we worked, we wrote any kind of scripts. They were recorded to paper tape.
The Monroe tape punch.
And then you feed the tape back in through the computer, and it would actually, it was,
and everything was done in an 80-column card image. It still is on IBM mainframes.
Yeah, well, actually, I remember my sister, she would program also. In fact, she was offered a job out of high school from IBM, but I remember at one point, and they had to use shared computers or shared resource, and again, they were all in cards, and at one point, she dropped the box of cards.
Been
she
there, done
creative,
that.
But
I remember in a classroom I did that once, and 200 cards on the floor. It's like, oh no,
right.
It was a pain.
What do you do?
Yeah, what do you do? That's when you think about a different career. But anyway, okay, let's get the show going. So we're going to start on this shot. Actually, we're going to start on this shot. I'm going to introduce you, run the show intro, and we'll do the interview. So, are you ready?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay, here we go. So we are going to start the show recording in 3, 2, and 1. Hi, everyone. Welcome to Lectora Live, your inside track into Lectora. Today, we've got with us Peter Sorenson from Quizzcle. But first, here we go. And we're back. And joining me is Peter Sorenson. Hey, how are you today, Peter?
Very good. I hope you won't ruin my day.
I'll try not to. We haven't lost any guests in flight yet, so I think we're okay. Actually, I love the name of your company, Quizzcle. We were before the show. I was singing, "Let's get Quizzcle, Quizzcle." I just thought, taking back to the '80s somewhere.
We
but
get a lot of compliments on that, and I have to, in full transparency, it had nothing to do with my creative genius at all. It actually, I used a name generator on the web, and it's one of the issues is that companies that start with Q are one of the easiest to remember.
Mm-hmm.
And with 3 syllables, it actually works better. So with those 2 parameters, I just let the computer do its thing, and it started to crank out names, and we settled on Quizzcle. Again, easy to remember. It rolls off the tongue, and it's surprising that we get so many compliments on it. It may indicate that the company has more to do with quizzes than anything else, but I really don't care as long as they remember the name.
Yeah, it's a good name. In fact, when I first saw it, I think I've heard of your company name before, and I was going, Quizzcle. I know that name. And I thought, that's a cool name. It is a cool name. We came up with our name, which is Relate Corporation, Relate. I was doing relational database design, and I was an IT guy for many years, and we were thinking relate, relational. But I said, it could be used for anything. If we ever go into marriage counseling, relate, relationships, whatever. So we kept it. So far,
you keep your options open.
I'm sorry?
You keep your options open.
Yeah, and we did, because when we first started, we were really doing IT work, and then we got into eLearning about 21 years ago, and the name just still fit. But Quizzcle is a really good name. I can't believe that actually generated it. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, and of course, when you look it up, of course, it's spelled differently. But today, people don't really, they think phonetically rather than actual correct spelling. So
right.
it works.
Yeah, spelling is a thing of the past. So there we go. So what got you into e-learning? It sounds like you did some programming and other things before that.
Well, it was kind of the whole journey so far has been somewhat circuitous. I started out in print years ago in something called rotogravure, which some people may not know much about, but it's a process that's used for anything that's printed that's usually a long run, and that would be wallpaper, wall coverings, as well as any of the packaging, print that you might see, labels for food items in your grocery store. And I worked in gravure engraving, which was actually making the cylinders that print, and went from there to printing, offset rotogravure printing. So I got that end of that whole industry, and then I moved into offset printing, and then from there into offset color separation and stripping, flats for printing. And then at that point in my life, desktop publishing was coming around and desktop color separation. So I got involved in that and worked in Manhattan for a few years as an expert in desktop publishing. And then I went from that to a company in Norwalk in Connecticut, running a color separation and retouching, photo retouching, and large print for a photo lab. And at some point, I began to get a little bored. And a colleague of mine who I was working with at the time said, "Well, why don't you look into multimedia and programming?" And I kind of laughed at the time because when I grew up, only guys with tape on their glasses and pocket protectors were interested in programming. But I'll tell you the first. So I went to school at night in New York, moving from Norwalk, finishing my job there, and then hopping on the train, heading to New York, and going to a number of different schools down there, Pratt Institute, New School, and I took the first programming course I took, or really scripting, if you really want to be clear about it, was in Macromedia Director. Mm-hmm. And that was with Lingo back then, and I was hooked because I could write a script and submit it to a computer, and it would do what I told it to do. And at that point, the die were cast. I mean, so I just went whole hog into multimedia, and then it moved in a conventional way, because at that point the web really wasn't a possibility. So we did everything on CD and kiosks. So I cut my teeth in that area, and then I got hired by a large company as a contractor to do director work. And someone introduced me to this, and so I was doing director and authorware work at that time, and then someone introduced me to a product called Lectora, and it was in a yellow lunch pail. I think it was a yellow lunch pail at that point, or might have been a yellow box. I can't recall what their earlier one. It was Lectora 2002, I believe. And I looked at it and I kind of laughed, because it was, as compared to what I had been doing, was very simplistic. But it's proven to be probably one of the best tools for someone like myself who wants to be able to have the possibility to make a program even better than it is natively. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the strengths of Lectora. So that's really what got me into the e-learning end, and it's been it's been a gas since then.
Yeah, Lectora has changed a lot. I remember, I think I looked at it right around 2002, and at that time we were doing authorware. It was almost right around the death of authorware. It was pretty much gone after that. But we were looking for something, and we thought then that Lectora wasn't powerful enough. And then we went back to it around 2006, and I went, oh, this has really changed. It had a lot of capabilities, and it could have been we just never looked at it seriously in 2002, and we haven't looked back since. We've been using it a lot, and it's a fun tool. And like you said, you can do things beyond the tool.
Yeah, I remember the early version. Can't remember how they went. They might have gone 2002. I don't know if there was a 2003 version or not. I know it went to 2004, I'm pretty sure. And somewhere along the way, I was being asked to make the tool do stuff that it just didn't natively do. But I love that anyway, because when I'm told something can't be done, I love to go ahead and make it actually do what it was supposed to, what it's being asked to do. Mm-hmm. And so I started, sorry, it's my dog. So I started to write some of these extensions, or what were called Lextensions at the time, which you could just basically import and use within the Lectora tool to allow it to do things that couldn't have been done previously. One of them was a way to control Captivate as a resource, and to make it do what it wouldn't do natively within Lectora. So that was always fun to create these little parts that could be kind of added to the main development tool itself, and allow it to be extended to meet a client's needs.
Yeah, in fact, now that you said that, that's where I know you from. I think we bought some of your extensions. This is back around 2000, probably 6.
Yeah, it's possible.
Because I'm going, you look familiar. I think you had an icon or something of yourself. I remember seeing you did some video. I think you had a video extension, didn't you? If I recall correctly.
Let's see, we had a number of them, and they were always, and I always enjoyed the names that we kind of came up with because, they were
I think we had several of them.
Innovative, and I can't remember what the video one was right now, and I'm sure I still have some of them. In fact, some people still contact me and ask me if I have updated any of them, but what would happen, which is kind of natural, is that Lectora would begin to add in those capabilities or control capabilities natively. So the need for them became less and less and possibly more obscure as far as which companies may find that they're valuable to them. Although there's still things that can be written to extend the course itself, but they're more for the advanced user than they would be for the casual user.
Well, also in your favor, the ones you made worked. I remember that because we bought some other ones from some other people. None of them worked. They were pretty crappy. But just
School of Hard Knocks. I mean, when you make something and it works for you, then you'd like to make it available to the rest of the audience. But we did find that it was difficult to sell them because the market kind of wanted everything for free.
I know.
And running my own company, it's free doesn't help me pay any bills. So, but there were nominal charges. It wasn't like
they weren't that expensive. They were very reasonable. Yeah. But that's funny because now it's coming back. I go, wait a minute, that's why I know the name. And then your voice sounded familiar too, and I was going, all right, what do I know? The minute you said the extensions, the light came on, and and I remember
that kind of the whole extension thing got me into trouble actually initially with the folks at Lectora because, and I can't remember which convention it was, but it was held out in Las Vegas. And it might have been around 2006 or so, I'm not sure. But at that point, they didn't have any way to allow anyone else to have a table there and to sell anything to those individuals who are using their tool. So I said, if there's no way to do it, I'll just go out and rent a room there and set up shop and introduce everyone to what we were doing. And that might have put a few people's nose out of joint, but that's kind of what my history's been anyway. But we did get some exposure at that point and an interesting introduction into that type of marketing.
That's interesting because in the pre-show we were talking about the Lectora Advisory Board. You and I are both members. I've only been a member since December of last year, but I actually thought they ran a pretty good advisory board, unlike some other ones I've belonged to throughout the years. And you mentioned that you occasionally can be somewhat abrasive in these things. And my comment was, that's good. That's good. Because you don't want a board that just goes, yep, great, love it. And so what gets better? Nothing.
Yeah. Well, the difficult issue for most people to understand, and especially for myself, or to accept, not understand, is that Lectora has their own plan to move forward, and it may not have a relationship to what I think they should do, and that's okay. But what they have in the past added some of the pieces that I've thought were missing for the kind of advanced user. So they are receptive, which is a good thing.
Yeah.
More so, I think, than other companies. I know I'd had some discussions with the owners at Storyline, and we ran into some issues where they wouldn't really be able to talk to me because of their reluctance to sign an NDA. So, but you don't find that with the folks at Lectora. They are open to listening, not only to their advanced users but to their casual users. So it's been a good and challenging relationship.
Yeah, I remember when I was with originally eHelp. This is when they had RoboDemo. There was a gal there, Silke Fleischer. She was the product manager, which then later became Captivate. But she would do something interesting. Whenever they had advisory board or what they didn't call it an advisory, but it was similar to that, and she would give everybody monopoly money and say, okay, here's 10 features we want to come up with. Put your money on the ones you want. And it was interesting. So everybody would put their money, and sometimes she was surprised at what people wanted versus what they wanted to do. And they would actually keep to that. They would try to make the money features the ones that they put emphasis on, because obviously that's what people wanted. And when you said what you said about, being abrasive, which I don't find you abrasive at all, but
give me a little time.
I'll give you some time, no problem. I've been in a lot of what they call brainstorming meetings, and this is just in business on the whole. And today, brainstorming meetings are the biggest waste of time anybody could ever have, because all ideas are good. Nothing is stupid. And I go, come on, let's not waste everybody's time. Some ideas are ridiculous. They're just a waste of everybody's time. And some things are stupid. Let's try to at least come up with something. When I learned brainstorming was you had to have a devil's advocate in that group. Somebody to really challenge the thought. If you're not willing to fight for the thought, it's probably not worth much. It kind of comes back to when you said everybody wants everything for free. Well, you get what you pay for. So,
well, some of the some of what people want are I find most often to be I'll just call it kind of like starchy filler. The value that it brings to the actual product or the end product is a little suspect. It may add to the visual quality of it. Drop shadows on text or drop shadows on boxes or rules. That's well and good, but if you're the head of a training department and your supervisor calls you in and asks you to validate why you're spending $100,000 or more a year on X number of courses, you can't point to shadows on a text box or rotated text or something of that visual nature as the support for the kind of numbers that you're spending for courses. So that's really where I probably weighted my resources and work over the past few years, which hasn't been so much in the visual presentation of the courses, but in helping companies realize the valuable data that can be returned by an individual's experience within a course, and what that information can actually indicate to an organization. And to date, companies don't capture that.
No.
They might capture when you start a course and when you end a course and how long you've been in it and what your score was and things like that. And for client compliance, that may be fine.
Right.
But what we tell our clients is that in our approach that compliance training isn't faith-based. It's you need real data to prove to you whether the efficacy of the course itself and whether the students in total or individually may have challenges with certain concepts or topics that are embedded within the training. So, it's better if you're going to run a course on sexual harassment and you've got multiple sites across the country, that you would identify which site may have difficulty with certain concepts and whether the sites might need some follow-up training to help them understand the impact of certain policies or procedures. So that's really where we've begun to focus our efforts.
What happens a lot right now is there's this weird impression out there that as long as you show somebody a page that relates to some sort of compliance thing, make them check it off and say, okay, I saw it, you've now trained them. Well,
that's the difference between, we say the difference between, you train a dog, you educate a person. The true test in education is the ability to employ knowledge in new and possibly similar situations. And if you can't do that, then it's simply rote memory. It's simply that you're just kind of regurgitating facts. And that doesn't really mean that you agree with those. It's simply that you've read them and you've got a good memory, at least for a short term.
And frankly, we need a lot more humans that can fetch. So it's...
Yeah, well, and that's the interesting thing is there that, now you've got the difference between the analog and the digital employee, where, the analog employee would read information and would store it within their brain for later recall, versus the digital employee who, maybe the newer, younger employee who relies on tools to help them recover or recapture information for later use. And that's a whole different approach in how to train those employees, or whether they are really trainable or educable. So you may need new tools to help those people access information in real time when they need it. Whereas the older employee may have actually kept that information in their memory bank somewhere for recall.
That's actually an excellent point. Just yesterday I was listening to something that they were saying, why does nobody remember anything anymore? And they said in the old days you had no choice but to remember, because you had no tools at your access to immediately go to Google or wherever and go, let's see, okay. That's very different from having to store it for your own basic survival. You needed to know these things, because otherwise it's going to come up over and over and over again. It's very different. Immediately, people are rushing to the search engines, which, like the Chinese say, written knowledge is secondhand knowledge.
Right.
So how much is actually being integrated? I think that's one of the problems we have right now. Which is why it seems like so few people have common sense, because they haven't integrated anything into their psyche so that they can remember, oh, right, if I do this, if I touch the stove, ooh, that hurt. But if I talk about or listen to about a stove burning, that doesn't mean I have any idea what it's going to do if I touch it.
Yeah, and it's an interesting point, too, because there's research where you can... If you watch someone perform a particular activity, it's easier for you to replicate that activity itself, because the actual neurons that fire in your brain are the same neurons that would fire in your brain if you yourself were performing that activity. It was research done, and they used one of the videos that they used was a James Bond movie, and I can't remember who it was, but it might have been Sean Connery, and there was a spider, I think, probably Black Widow, I'm assuming.
I remember Bond, that one, yeah.
Crawling on his head or chest or whatever. And as these people watched it, the neurons that fired in their brain were the same that would fire if it actually had been happening to them. So that was a real great support for, watch and perform type of training. So and that's most often missed in a lot of training. Usually that's in-person training where you're in the field and someone performs a particular action and then you've got to perform it yourself. It might lead to the fact that more video could be used in those particular instances and may be as effective.
You'd probably not be surprised at this, but we have tried for many years to put at the beginning of a course something that makes the employee who has never learned this before try to figure it out ahead of time. And we get nixed every single time. It's like, look, put them on the spot a little bit. Make them think. Make them react. No. No. We need positive training. What's positive? And there's nothing negative about it. You're just trying to see how they deal with a problem or a situation they have not yet technically encountered. No.
Yeah. Well, really, all you're doing at that point is baselining the knowledge that the individual has. I mean, how do you know if you've actually? How do you know if your training's been effective if you have nowhere from which to measure performance? I mean, if they could already jump 10 feet and you're going to train them on how to jump 9 feet, well, when they jump 10, you're going to pat yourself on the back and say, wow, look what a great job I did. Well, they could already do it. You just didn't know it.
That's true. It's funny. That kind of reminds me of an old joke. You've probably heard this one about the college professor who's teaching his students, and he has a frog there with 4 legs. And he tells the frog, jump, frog, jump. And the frog jumps 30 feet. The students are taking notes, 30 feet, frog, jump. Then he cuts a leg off, and he goes, jump, frog, jump. And the frog jumps about 15 feet. And they went, okay, take notes. Next leg, he's jumping 10 feet. Third leg, he's only jumping about 6 feet now. Finally, cuts off the last leg and says, jump, frog, jump. Nothing. Jump, frog, jump. Nothing. And the students are writing notes frantically. So, class, do you know what happened just now? And they're like shaking their heads, no. And he goes, the frog is now deaf.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting point because, when we first started taking a look at the type of data that was being returned by courses, capturing it and analyzing it, we, the trap that we would fall into is that we would think that we knew exactly what the data was telling us, or before we even got the data, we thought we knew what the data was going to reveal. And one of the professors that we work with basically said, you never know what the data is going to tell you until a post-analysis is done. And even then, you can't be that sure. You can only be sure of the fact that it may indicate that something is occurring. So we're always very careful to, when we speak to individuals about what the technology can or cannot do, is that it indicates a particular type of situation may be present, because trying to be absolute is always going to be problematic.
Now, you brought us something that resonates pretty much with me, and that's a lot of the tools focus on the glitz, the glamour, the this, the that.
Right.
And not all that much has changed in the last, let's say, 15, 20 years in terms of better analytics of what people are learning, better scenario-driven approaches, or just anything that might create more retention and anything else. Right. Where do you think e-learning is going as far as tools and as far as really the industry?
Yeah. Well, this is where we really focused our attention about, I guess, about 4 years or so ago, when I was getting a master's in instructional design. Part of what intrigued me was motivation, intrinsic versus extrinsic, and how much more effective intrinsic motivation was. And that led me to thinking about training, web-based training versus classroom training. And the issue there is that there's always someone monitoring the education process when they're in a classroom. The teacher can see who's paying attention, whether someone's fidgeting, whether they're looking out the window, whether they're engaged, whether they seem a little lost, whether the classroom as a whole is having a difficult time with an issue or a topic. And that input is cut off from the instructional designer. The teacher can shift their focus or shift their approach midstream based upon what their inputs, visual and audio, are telling them. The instructional designer, in some way, may live in a world in which they believe they are perfect or king, because they have to believe that what they've developed is going to be effective and that people are going to like it. And they may be 100% off base, but they have no chance to modify their approach while individuals were in the course, because it's canned, it's prepackaged. And even then, their resources to access are limited once individuals are done taking the course, and there's no way for them to perform any or identify any correlation between activities and success. And that's what moved us to begin to develop the technology that we're using and employing, initially with Lectora, which allows us to capture basically everything that the learner does, and then do a post-analysis to identify what's been effective and what's been least effective. One client had for years always embedded audio within their courses, and they gave the individual the opportunity to either play the audio or stop it, pause it, things like that. And we found out that people were only listening to the audio about 8% of the time, and even then about half of those would listen to the audio in its entirety before they moved on to the next page. So in that particular instance, or for that particular client, the audio itself was of suspect value. So what they did was save the money on the audio portion, and then to identify those objects that were more effective, or in a training sense, and then put more of those into the course rather than audio. So it worked out to their benefit, and so they would better use their resources or spend their money on those tools that were more effective in educating the audience.
One of the tough parts is, when you start looking at generational learning, where you've got older learners in between and the really young ones, and they all learn totally differently or have different styles of learning. For example, the audio is a perfect example of that. A lot of the younger ones want the audio. They don't like this. They don't read. They're not readers.
Right.
So to them, it's a silent movie without audio, and they don't know what to do. A lot of the older ones prefer reading because they read quickly, and they don't want to listen to it unless you like being entertained. I like being entertained sometimes. So I read and listen, but I'm usually way ahead of the audio. But then you have someone in between that wants to listen, but they want to be able to turn it off. It's just interesting. And
Well,
it's a
you
tough
can.
one.
That's the great idea about capturing the information is that you, you know, if you begin to think about the personalization of training, once it's going to sound kind of silly, but once the intelligence behind a course begins to understand how a student learns and what their what objects or what types of information they like best, you can actually source that later on and have a course self-adjust its presentation to a learner based upon what their preferences are. So in other words, if audio is part of the course, but they don't like audio, well then it's not even presented to the individual to have the opportunity to turn on or off. So the possibilities of being able to personalize an individual's learning experience is really within our grasp, and the tools in the HTML environment are available for us to be able to do that in a number of ways, not just visual, but understanding the objects within the courses and either deleting them or making them available. So there's the ability to personalize is going to be one of the benefits of knowing how people learn and what their preferences are.
That that's a great point, and it could be done with an LMS. It could be done with employee profiles on the LMS or wherever.
Right.
And yet, you've probably seen this. I am seeing more and more companies turn off custom data on an LMS. So you get course launch, or you get the student name or ID, course launch, grade, you're done. That's it.
Yeah.
You get nothing. And you can't even write custom data out anymore. They just completely block it. And you just go, why are you paying $500,000 a year for an LMS when it does nothing really for you?
Yeah, well, that's what we, that's what we took a look at, because the LMS, the way we look at an LMS is that it provides the data that a company will need to be able to print out or provide electronically to ensure that they're compliant, and in case of an audit. When we take a look at our behavior-related data, we look at that as the kind of the color commentary part of the training, where you can begin to take a look at really what's successful and what isn't successful, and then make judgments on that. I mean, we had one client who were looking at their security issues within their organization. So we built a course that had about 8 different security topics in it. And then we reported back to them which one of those topics were most challenging for the organization or for particular sites within the organization, so that then they had a map to move forward on, where they could pick off the low-hanging fruit and do some follow-up training on those particular topics that would help them ensure that their culture was one which would support their general security goals. So data can have a massive impact on how a company moves forward, and possibly even identifying whether individuals are well suited for their particular job or not. And those are in the areas of latency. In other words, if I said to you, I don't know if you're married or not, but if I said to you, do you love your wife? And you didn't answer immediately, but there was a gap there between me asking the question and you responding. Sometimes that gap can tell you more about
Sure.
in individuals' engagement or response to an issue than their answer can be. And that's why we take a look at things even in true false, where you presented the question. We basically know how long it took you to make a decision. We can tell whether what level you were challenged by that particular question, whether you changed your mind once, twice, multiple times, and then we can use that information to identify whether you had a particular difficulty with that question or not, versus an LMS may just capture the fact that you answered the question correctly or incorrectly. Well, okay, that gives me an idea whether you ultimately answered it correctly or incorrectly, but it doesn't give me any idea as to whether that question was challenging at all, and to what degree or what level that challenge was. So that's where we like to focus our energies in trying to mine the data that's being captured and to make sense out of it. When you think about even the classroom, if you've got limited resources, why spend the same resources on those individuals who get the idea versus those who are having difficulty with the idea? If you already get it, I don't need to spend any time with you. If you don't get it, then I do need to spend some time with you, or I need to partner you up with someone who does get it. And that's just a much smarter way to move forward. And those are that's the kind of information or data that companies can use to make their to increase the competency of their workforce, and again, in compliance issues, is to ensure that people react correctly in particular situations.
Yeah, I totally agree with you, and that's what has been missing and is missing currently from most training. Nor is there any curiosity on many companies' parts to even find it out. Why do I need to know that?
Well, that's the interesting thing is, I think it was the book Big Data, I think. But one of the scenarios in there was that in the South, when tornadic activity was forecast, or bad weather, or extended periods of bad weather, they found that, and I think it was in Home Depot or one of those large box stores, they found that shovels sales spiked, and so did Pop-Tarts. So what they did was, when they realized that bad weather was coming, and they only got this through the analysis of sales data. So what they did was when they knew bad weather was coming, they put the Pop-Tarts next to the shovels, and the sales of both went up exponentially. So the thing is that data can reveal, again, going back to your one of your initial statements, was that if we think we know what we know, then we're wrong. It's what we don't know that could be most beneficial to us, and that's either in marketing or in education.
That's true. It was a great conversation. And Peter, I was going to ask you, are you going to the user conference in a couple weeks?
Actually, this time I'm not. I mean, I've probably presented it the last 4 or 5 years, I guess, in a row. This year I'm not going, and it's not because I wouldn't enjoy the conference, but we're really putting a push on now, talking to companies about the value of data, and we're actively beginning to really refocus our company in the capturing and analysis of training data, and what value that holds for organizations. So our focus is a little different. We'll probably be back again next year, but this year we won't be represented there.
This is my first year going. So after all these years, I finally got to go. It usually hits when I can't make it. So I guess I'll see you next year, hopefully.
Yeah, and and it's not because we're not committed to the tool, because no matter what the relationship has been with Lectora in the past, I think their tool is really the best on the market, and that's simply because it can be extended. It can be made to do something that it doesn't natively do, and that allows us as developers to meet the needs of our clients when other tools just don't afford us the same possibilities.
Yeah, that's true. Well, Peter, as one of your previous clients, now that I remember, it's been a pleasure meeting you again, and I hope you come back on the show. I think you've got a lot to offer. This has been a good conversation.
Maybe next time, if we can, we'll do a little dog and pony for you about
sounds great.
How data gets captured and what it actually means.
That sounds great. Yeah, I'm an old database guy, so I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
That's going to be great. Well,
Great,
Peter,
thank you.
we will see you next time. By the way, are you giving any presentations, doing anything soon, or how can people get a hold of you?
Well, they can certainly call us at the office in Connecticut. If you'd like the phone number, it's 860-361-6746, or they can always contact me by email, either through our website or at peters@quizzicle.com. Always happy to either look at new challenges or offer my opinion, or if someone even has an issue where they're having trouble making Lectora do something, I'd be happy to chime in.
That's great, and we will put that in the show notes. We won't put your phone number, but we'll put your website and everything in the show notes.
Okay. And well, it's on most of the walls across the state, country.
That's right. So. Well, anyway, Peter, hey, it's been a pleasure. And if you're watching the show, we are on Vimeo. It's vimeo.com/channels/Lectora Live. And we're also the live stream right now. You can see those after the fact. That is on YouTube at youtube.com/RelateCasts. We'll see you soon. Have a good one, everyone. Take care.
Thanks
Bye-bye.
again.